Hello, good afternoon, good morning. Welcome to Data and AI Live. Thank you very much for joining us wherever you are in the world. Today, we are going to be talking about, as you know, how to use AI responsibly in advertising. Just to start with, I'm going to introduce my guests who you can see on the screen. So thank you all for joining us. We've got Dr. Alexandra Dobra-Kiel. Alexandra is Innovation Strategy Director at Behave, who are a specialist behavioural change consultancy, and she also sits on the Advertising Association's AI Taskforce. We've got Tom Laranjo, who's CEO of Total Media Group, one of the biggest independent media agencies in the UK. He's also CEO of Total Media's in-house behavioural change consultancy Behave, and he's got a 25-year career working with some of the biggest advertisers and brands in Europe. And finally, Annabelle Gillard. Annabelle is an advisor at Principia Consulting, who are a specialist ethics consultancy. She holds a master's degree in philosophy and AI, and she's the founder of Conversations in AI, a specialist AI ethics events and conversations group. So thank you, all three of you, for joining us. A real pleasure to have you here.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Just before we get into it, I just want to cover a few housekeeping bits for everyone listening and watching. The first thing is, remember, we are live, so if anything goes wrong, that's kind of part of the fun. I've had cleaners walking into my room before, and sometimes reception goes down. So if anything like that happens, we'll endeavour to get back on as soon as possible. And secondly, we are live and interactive, and we're going to talk for probably about 30 minutes, and then we're going to go into Q&A. So do get your questions in the comments down below at any time. So if you've got a question that you think of in the next 5 minutes, please put it in the comments down below, and we'll endeavour to get through all of the questions at the end. So we can see everyone clearly now, and let's get into it. And I think a good place to start, and I'll come to you, Annabelle, I think first, is why should we care about AI ethics in advertising?
Thank you, Jeremy. Thanks for inviting me to join you to be part of this conversation. It's brilliant to see these conversations starting to happen. I've been a little bit preoccupied with AI ethics for a while, and so I'm delighted you've asked me that question. I'm going to start with a very quick, my sentence definition of what AI is, which hopefully will help to start illuminate why the ethical bit matters. The actual phrase artificial intelligence, the artificial bit means man-made, not naturally occurring, and then lots of people get into debates about intelligence, but the sort of shorthand typical definition is it means doing something that previously only humans could do. But what that means in a practical sense is it's about sifting through the data to find patterns to be able to make predictions about the future, whether those predictions are used for problem solving or whatever, or generating text or whatever that might be. But it's basically an increasingly accurate prediction generator is how I think about AI. And so what do we mean then by AI ethics? And that's about the human impact of using AI to do things that formerly humans did. I like to think of it as the Jurassic Park question. Your scientists were so busy thinking about whether or not they could do it, they didn't stop to think whether they should do it. So that's really what AI ethics tries to get at. And a helpful place to go for some sort of resources on this, if anyone's interested in digging further, is the OECD, who've done a great job in kind of marshalling together lots of resources, and they name 5 AI ethics principles, which I think is as good a place to go as any. We're at the stage where I think 2 years ago there were 250 different sets of AI ethics principles. Actually, just sticking with the 5 of the OECD, I think is a manageable place to start. So the first one is about sustainable growth and well-being. The second is human rights, including fairness and privacy. The third is transparency and explainability. Fourth is robustness and safety. And then the 5th one is accountability. So really what that means is, how do we know when AI is being used? Do we understand how it's been used? Is it safe? Is it fair? Is it non-discriminating? This point about fairness is probably the one most people are most awareness, that there can be bias in some of these AI systems. A lot of the time, people want to use AI because they say, well, humans are biased, and how can we get away from that? But actually, if the data that the AI is using to form those predictions is biased in itself, then what you can actually have is entrenching that bias. I think of it as having three different places. You can have bias in the data, then you can have bias in the algorithm, and then you can have bias in the deployment. I'm conscious of time, so I'm not sure if we have time to go into it, but I can give you examples of each of these if it's useful. The second area that I think I'd highlight is the use increasingly of kind of deep fakes. And now we've got generated images and generated text. I think that's really raising some questions for all of us about, well, it's harder to tell what's true, and then what does that mean about who we trust and how we consume information? And then the third thing I'd say that I think is particularly relevant for this one, and all of these topics you can dig in, there's lots more to dig into. The third one I'd say is most relevant for this is kind of generative AI. Now that we have generative AI through ChatGPT, but I really be keen to emphasize there's lots of others. ChatGPT isn't the only one, but who does that content belong to, and how is it possible to be a creative if we're in an environment where the AI can do it for us, but that AI has been trained on the work of lots of other creatives? So those would be some of the issues that come out in AI ethics. And then why does it matter? Well, you might say, well, hang on a minute, we've got the EU AI Act now. Surely kind of regulation is going to take care of all of that. But the reality is the EU is the first regulation. Up until now, no regulation has existed anywhere on this topic beyond what already is in existence. The UK is developing a different sort of regulation. The US is developing different again. So in the it's whether you regulate the AI, whether you regulate the application of it. So there's lots of complexity around that. Whereas if you as a firm or you as an individual develop your own set of ethical principles, that can help you cut through that complexity of managing lots of different approaches. The second thing I'd say is we're going to need more than regulation. Regulation is necessary, but it's not sufficient. Regulation tends to be, backward looking, tends to be quite slow, tends to be specific, tends to have a particular jurisdiction, whereas technology is none of those things. It moves fast, it's constantly changing, it's global. So again, AI ethics can kind of stand over that and help you navigate an approach. And the third point, and I think for me this is the most important, is it's how you help to build trust, both with your customers and with your employees. In an environment in which we're digitalizing at pace, where things are constantly changing, where it's hard to tell what's true, your decision to be transparent and clear and human first in your approach, and to be explicit and hold yourself accountable to that, is really the way to build trust, which some would say is the most important currency in a digitalizing economy. So that would be my opening comments, and happy to dig into any of that further.
Yeah, and thanks for that. Brilliant way to start. And my takeaway from that, just from what you're saying, so if you're a brand, you can't just follow AI regulation. AI ethics is different, and there's more to it than that. There's more to it than just following the regulation.
That's right.
Yeah.
I mean, there are obviously legal implications to get it wrong. If you're using AI for your hiring, and then you discover that the algorithm that you were using to hire with was actually filtering out all women, as Amazon discovered when they tried to develop one, then you can be on the hook legally for that. But it goes beyond that. So another sort of example is there are some housing associations now who are using facial recognition instead of a door key to let you into the building. But we know that facial recognition is not reliable. It's quite good if you're a white man. It's all right if you're a white woman. As you add in more complexities around ethnicity and different kind of gender constructs, it gets less and less and less reliable, and that's your actual access to your home. There's a kind of material impact there. Or the use of AI by the Dutch government, which they did to look at whether there was benefit fraud occurring, and by using the taking what was coming out of a computer, without challenging it, without understanding the context, meant some terrible harms. Benefits were refused from people who shouldn't have been. Children were taken away. Terrible things happen. So yes, there is a legal standard that we need to meet, but AI ethics goes beyond that. Not least because it's kind of trying to be forward-looking. It's trying to prevent the harm from happening in the first place, rather than just offer a route out of the harm afterwards.
Yeah. Tom, anything you add to what what Annabelle said so far in terms of why organisations and brands should care about AI ethics?
Well, I think Annabelle's spot on, and I think it's going to take a cooperative effort to bring ethics and ethical considerations to how we design and implement and improve AI. I suppose I would add that I'm an enormous AI optimist. I think we're at the point of a really positive renaissance where AI will help us to learn together, grow together, and do so many more wonderful things. But it has the potential to make things worse. So I think we should really care because of that potential, if nothing else. I think Yuval Harari makes a wonderful analogy of the advent of AI and compares it to the development of the printing press, and argues that was a moment in time where there was an explosion of capability to deliver data at a huge rate, unseen in human history. But for the first 200 years, it largely set off religious wars of various constructs built around competing versions of the Bible and the creation of the Malus Maleficarum and the persecution of women who were brilliant, but charged as witches. So you spent the first 200 years with this amazing technology, using it really badly and impacting humanity profoundly in a negative way. And it wasn't until the onset of really brilliant institutions and academic frameworks around that tool that led to the gains and the benefits that we all see now from that amazing technology. And I think the same is very true. I think it's a very wise analogy, and that's what we should care.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think that framing it or analogy of the printing press is a fantastic one. Alexandra, sorry to come to you last on this one because Annabelle and Tom have given such great answers, but anything you'd add about why we should care about AI ethics?
I think that in a nutshell, we should care about AI ethics because our prosperity depends on it. Our prosperity as humans, our prosperity as nations. So that's the only point I would add to everything has been said. Well
said. Let's. I think we could probably talk about this topic for ages, but for purposes of time, let's move on now and sort of, I guess, discuss in a little more detail the kind of ethical dilemmas that organisations are going to face when using AI. So I know Annabelle touched on one or two examples there, but coming to you, Tom, anything that you can outline or any examples you can give, specific or not, of the ethical dilemmas organisations face when using AI?
Absolutely. I think there are loads. So again, I would just reiterate that I'm a huge optimist about the technology, but I think it's good to know the pitfalls. I think things that come to mind are speed versus purpose. I think we've seen a blizzard of minimum viable products in the space coming to market to try and capture share really quickly, but not necessarily considering the unintended consequences, particularly as minimum viable products rub up against either delivered or oncoming regulation and legislation. So I think there are a lot of products out there at the moment that won't survive what we expect to be comparable legislation to the EU Data Act. So I think balancing speed to market versus what is it delivering and is it right? I think there's a lot of challenges that we're seeing with businesses with the cash for data question, where you have groups like the New York Times going through litigation with ChatGPT and saying, we don't want you to train your models on our data, thank you very much, and the money that you're offering isn't sufficient, versus people like Axel Springer who are saying, yes please, we've been here before when we held out too long against the social media giants and we suffered for it, so we'll take your money, thank you very much, and you can train your models on our data. I think there are some really big implications for talent, even from our own selves, thinking about how we're training people. You think about the profound changes that everyone is predicting that AI will bring to the world in every aspect of what we do. And you just ask yourself, do you see a mirrored effort in how we understand, work with, and deliver AI in all aspects of society that we expect AI to have this profound impact on? And for my part, I really don't. And I think that's a really big question for companies, for schools, for government, is if even the modest expectations of AI are met, then are we training people enough, and how are we retraining for this new world?
Yeah, that's such an interesting concept, and let's just segue from it because I think it's a good one to discuss. But I was having this conversation with someone the other day, and so, for example, in the recruiting and search world, and I'm sure it's the same in the advertising world, typically the model is you bring people into your business when they're young graduates, and the way they're trained typically is they do a lot of the sort of heavy lifting grunt tasks initially in the first year or two to learn the business, and then they progress from there. And I think most industries are the same. And I guess with the advancements in AI, the thought process is that a lot of that will be taken away. So I'm a relative optimist like you, Tom. I think in that actually that'll mean that you can train people a lot more contextually than before, and really optimize that training. But at the same time, it's going to create real challenges for organizations in, well, how do we bring on our graduates and our new people, and how do we go about training them now?
Completely agree, and I think it leaves questions for organizations both in how you train people contextually, and that's one theme that needs developing, but also how do you manage the interim? Because as organizations leap forward and CEOs of all stripes leap out onto various platforms to announce really grandly, changes come, these menial jobs which these grads were doing for so long, we're going to replace all of these with a blizzard of AI tools that will take away these admin jobs. And then, minutes later, when that speech is finished, your graduates ask, well, are those jobs going now? And you go, no, not yet. We haven't finished creating it. So keep doing those menial jobs we talked to you about for a bit longer whilst we get this done. But then eventually we'll replace you. And the narrative is so ahead of the implementation in many cases as to just disenfranchise a whole section of your employee base. And as you say, there's a problem of, well, then how do you reorient people to learn tasks when we've learned so much from doing previously? So it opens up some really big questions.
Yeah. And in terms of an ethical dilemma of a brand, then, is a lot of that about, I mean, Annabelle gave some examples a bit earlier of a couple, I think, but is a lot of the dilemma of when they implement the technology. So, for example, the one you gave about facial recognition and the system not recognizing or over-recognizing white males as opposed to other ethnic characteristics. So I guess it's the ethical dilemma there about, well, when should we start using this technology? Do we only start using it when it's perfect?
Well, for me, no. I think it's a series of questions you need to ask yourself, and there are so many good resources for that. I think Amy Webb does a brilliant series of questions that you can ask yourself around the implementation of AI cross-sector, cross-market. But for me, some of the bigger ones and more profound are, where's the data from? How have you trained your AI and what's it for? And even if you just go through that basic triptych, you can come to some really good outcomes, but you can also come to quite worrying ones. So if Annabelle was talking about facial recognition, a lot of facial recognition solutions that are used in the advertising industry, both from an insight and effectiveness point of view, still use one-shot recognition, which is really troubling because you're basing your analysis profile on one image of one thing. And it's not surprising that gets is vulnerable. And then that same image will be appended to data about what a community thinks about a specific subject, mining historic questions around research, and then presenting it as insight. So if you package those things going, what have you done? Well, we've taken one-shot image recognition solution to represent an entire community based on historic data to provide you insight about what you should do. It's quite worrying. So I think it's really important to have that triptych, I think, in mind when developing your solutions, specifically when you're trying to do it ethically. And I think that's what brands worry about is, where's the data, how have you trained it, and what's it for?
Yeah, where's the data, how have you trained it, what's it for? I think that's a good little structure to follow. Alexandra, coming to you, any examples anything you'd add from what Tom said, or any examples you can give of sort of typical ethical dilemmas that brands and organizations are facing?
Yeah, I think there are 2 points for me. The additional ethical dilemma that companies are facing, not just in the advertising world, but of any company that uses AI, is actually the sort of sustainability footprint that AI models involve. How does it actually align with the fact that, on the other hand, we have all these grand discourses about how we want to decrease our carbon footprint, etc. So we need actually to come at a much more prioritized view on what sort of AI systems we need to use and what for, so that we don't just create waste for waste's sake. The other aspect is around what Tom said about how do you train in context. We tend to forget that the way we learn is quite sequential. And if AI is taking some parts of a sequence of learning, then it becomes very difficult for the human brain to actually have the full route of learning. And of memorizing that. So we also need to be careful about which parts we should really delegate to AI and which parts we shouldn't, even if AI could do them, because it will affect that logical sequence of learning. And then maybe I'm looking too far into the future, but there is the point around the consciousness of AI and the nature of consciousness. If at one point, actually, AI is evolved enough to have feelings, then what does it mean for our own identity as humans? And what does it mean in terms of how we treat AI? And I think that is also worth throwing in here.
To your second point there about AI affecting sequential learning, and you made the point about there are some things that AI could do, but maybe we shouldn't because it's going to affect that. Could you give a sort of example of that?
I mean, I think there are many examples, and I'm more a conceptual person than an example person. So you put me a colle, as we say in French.
Yeah.
But, for instance, on typical jobs of graduates would be, for instance, to also schedule some meetings or things like that. I mean, that is really not nice. No one wants to do it, or taking notes of meetings, etc. Yet, actually, the exercise of taking notes from meetings will put you into the discipline of knowing what was worth, what wasn't worth, that was discussed during the meeting. So how do you prioritize information? But also it enables you to actually reflect back on the meeting, and in prioritizing the information, also think about those emotional cues, behavioral cues that are not necessarily translated into the words. And that also helps you then in terms of how do you gain in your emotional intelligence, how do you behave in front of a certain room, etc. And I think that is that would be one of the examples.
Yeah, I hear you. Someone mentioned an example similar to this the other day to me, which is about, so for content, it might take someone 5 hours to write a blog, for a content piece, and it would take AI maybe 5 seconds, and they do the same job. But I guess the difference is that the person who's put in the 5 hours is going to have quite a deep understanding of that topic that they can take forward, I guess. Yeah. So you're kind of, there is a worth to that time. Annabelle, anything you add on this question or examples?
Well, that last point you made, I think, is exactly right. I think it would be good we should be intentional about it. It's very easy to just go, oh, we've got the shiny toy and it does some good stuff. But it's about, and this picks up on, I think, Alexandra's point about sustainability as well. We should be using AI where there's a strategic benefit for us to do so, and where we're intentional about it. And we do need to keep some space to be playful, but we just need to be mindful of what the human impact is. And my concern with all these things is that human impact. So for organizations, how do you take the people in your organization with you on that journey? How do you think about the sorts of efficiencies you're going to be creating, and how do you actually use them purposefully rather than find them just being sort of sucked up with the general busyness of work? How do you kind of democratize or kind of create trust and inclusion within the organization for the people who are hopefully going on that journey with you? And I just sort of add as a sort of tangential point, in general, we haven't managed change terribly well. Transformation hasn't been a huge success for business. I think McKinsey put it behavior right, and usually because we don't get the human side of it right. And this is a huge transformation that we're looking at coming here. And like Tom and like you, I'm an absolute optimist in what is possible for this, but in order to get those benefits, we need to be intentional about it, and getting the human side of it right, I think, is going to be absolutely critical. And to Alexandra's point, actually some of the training and some of the reskilling we're going to need is in those human elements, like emotional intelligence. That's the sort of stuff where we need some sort of upskilling as well, I think, and how we manage this journey together. Yeah,
well said. 100% agree. We're going to go into the Q&A in about 10 minutes, everyone. So as I said at the start, please do get your questions in the comments down below whenever you're ready, whenever they come into your mind. But just before we go into that Q&A, let's finish, or the next 5 or 10 minutes, let's talk about what practical steps organisations can take to ensure they're using AI responsibly. So I'm going to come to you first on this, Alexandra, if I may. I know you've written a piece close to this for the Advertising Association's AI Taskforce recently. So yeah, maybe you can talk a bit about this for us.
Yeah, so what the organization needs to start thinking about, I think there are 3 aspects: training, structure, and culture. In terms of training, it's really what sort of training should companies start thinking about deploying. And a classic limitation of ethical theories and application is their tendency to be presented as either competing or exclusive. And obviously this really doesn't help because this just obscures the nuances of ethical decision-making. In the paper for the Advertising Association, what I landed on was this concept of the Socratic method. The Socratic method, in very simple terms, is a method whereby you start to pose provoking questions that will hopefully change your assumptions, your data points, and your viewpoints about a certain topic. Here, the ethical dilemma that AI poses. And so I think that the Socratic method, by being an iterative process, is actually the best way to train employees into how to deal with AI dilemmas. Because it is this iteration of it that also allows the employee to almost be ahead of the ethical dilemma that will be posed. So there is a preventative aspect to it. Unlike regulation, which is fixated on putting safeguards, which are often punitive, but actually that doesn't mean that you have more ethics in place as a consequence. I mentioned structure. Organizations should not conflate ethics with compliance. These are really not the same, and the sort of a cognitive approach that an ethics expert requires are very different from the cognitive approach that a compliance expert requires. Compliance departments essentially are there to ensure legal adherence. But this should not be equated with what ethics is about. Ethics is nuanced, it requires reflection, very deep reflection, and it cannot be simplified into a checklist. The second problem of compliance departments is that they often operate in complete silos, and they are so focused on very little aspect that they try to regulate that they completely forget about the more broader picture, about all the various ways that ethical dilemmas can arise. And then I mentioned culture. Also, since the pandemic, we have seen that uncertainty has been part of our daily lives as organizations and as humans, as there is more and more risk on the sort of global landscape. We're still not good with grappling with uncertainty. We still want control, and this is also why we're fixated on regulation rather than ethics. What we need to really learn is to accept uncertainty, because AI, due to its fast development, involves a certain level of uncertainty. Now, I'm not saying that we need to be fatalistic and just let it run because we're just waiting on the bench of accepting uncertainty. But it means that we also need to, yes, learn to deal with uncertainty and be much more focused on prevention and foresight rather than necessarily forecast. So that's what I'd say.
Yeah. Annabelle, anything you'd add on this topic around practical steps organisations can take? I mean, if you're a brand watching this or a team and you sort of maybe don't know where to start or how to think about this.
I mean, I'd absolutely endorse everything Alexandra said. I thought that was fantastic. I think for a lot of organisations, the reality is they've already got AI in their businesses. They've probably got it all over the place. Actually, the first thing I would suggest if an organisation wants to get on top of this is probably do a mapping exercise, because you've probably got it in all sorts of places you're not necessarily thinking about. The second is you probably need a new governance process around it. You probably need a new governance approach, and that will depend on both where your existing exposure is and where you kind of think your strategic advantage will lay. And it's important that governance process, that governance approach incorporates a range of views. It's really, that there can be a tendency to think, oh yeah, well, that's all happening in the IT department. Well, having the skills of a data scientist is not the same as having the skills of to consider ethical dilemmas. They are different, and if you have the ethical consideration happen within the line, it can get stifled by other commercial concerns, or there can be other influences can come to play. So if you actually want to get this, you want to look at this rigorously, you need to put that in a separate pot and make sure that it's got properly delegated authority, as well as a range of views. It's quite nice, if you can, to think about who's going to be affected by your use of AI and see to what extent you can actually replicate that sort of mind frame in your ethical review process. There's a great line for disability campaigning called "Nothing about us without us," and I think that really applies to the use of AI. And the third thing I would say is ethics by design, where possible, is by far the most not only effective but actually efficient way of getting ethics right. It means your initial progress will be slightly slower, but if you're making sure that the data is in the right place in the first place, and you're making sure that your algorithm is being developed with the right challenges, then what you produce will be so much more resilient and scalable than if you don't do that work at the beginning and you try and sort of backfill it. So those would be my 3 suggestions.
Yeah. Tom, anything you add on this topic?
I think, again, echoing Annabelle, I think both answers have been brilliant. I think I'll build on it by saying play, not pronounce. There's a powerful temptation to pronounce sort of mission accomplished. We're using AI, we're doing AI, we've implemented AI everywhere because it feels important to your people, to your customers, to your shareholders. But it's a really profoundly important moment to play with AI, test, learn, understand before implementing. And it's a good time to be doing that because there's lots of regulation, legislation, and ethical considerations that will come and wrap the AI that we're producing now. So a good time to play with it before a blizzard of activations. I think something we talk a lot about internally as well as externally is don't sacrifice excellence for efficiency. Most of the conversations around AI, unfortunately, are all around doing things quicker, cheaper, faster, rather than better, and saying, how can you use AI to do things genuinely better, to make things more exciting, more innovative, more creative, higher functioning, not just replicating what we do now quicker. And then I think generally just being positive. Ofcom put out some data about this a few weeks ago, which I just found to my notes on, was 79% of 13 to 17-year-olds are using AI regularly in the UK for play and work without any drama, without any hysteria. They're just getting on with it. And that's quite exciting. A generation of people who are brought up understanding how to question and prompt AI to deliver outcomes that's going to be coming into the workforce in years to come is quite an exciting resource that's going to come into the market without a lot of the worry that we have. So if we can create and help lay the foundations, we should be seeing a group of people coming into the market who are just very adept, very excited, and not as anxious as potentially everyone else's. So yeah.
Yeah, great point. And I think that mindset shift to better, so thinking, I guess, optimization rather than just efficiency, I think is a great mindset shift to have. We're gonna go into some questions shortly, but someone has mentioned the Aspen Institute. I think this was when we were talking about sort of frameworks at the start, but someone's mentioned the Aspen Institute and a framework they've got. I don't know if have either of you come across the Aspen Institute and that framework?
Unfortunately not. No, I haven't come across it.
No, I haven't either. So
I haven't. I'm just trying to take a look now. I mean, on the one hand, I absolutely welcome the more people talking about this and prioritizing it, the better. But there is a profusion of frameworks, which is why I tend to kind of go back to the OECD one, just because it's got global application and it's quite simple. But if there's a great one at Aspen as well, and that's brilliant. Just having a look now.
In terms of frameworks generally, though, I mean, and coming back to sort of implementation, I mean, it's all very well having a framework, but how do you then sort of bake that into your advertising processes? Right. Just from a, you talk about the human perspective. How do you sort of bake those things in from the human perspective so that it's actually beneficial?
Well, the AI frameworks themselves were sort of all emerging around about 2019, 2020, and then that exact question has been the focus of the last 2 or 3 years. How do we actually operationalize this? And if you go to the likes of the Turing Institute website, or if you go to the OECD, you will find quite a lot of guidance actually about how do you take that policy and or this particular principle and turn it into action. I think honestly, it's a little bit company dependent. There will be issues that are more relevant for one company than another. So I don't think there's a one size fits all. I think, and slightly to Alexandra's point, getting ethics right is actually annoyingly a bit complicated and does require a nuance and does require reflection and isn't a checklist. So the principle is a starting point, and then unfortunately I think that the governance frameworks that you have within your business have to then work through which the bits that matter and are most relevant to you and how it makes sense within your culture and your structure to sort of navigate those.
Yeah. We're rapidly running out of time, everyone. So get your questions in down below if you've got any more questions. We've had one question come in though, which I'll put to everyone, which is quite interesting, which is, can you make an AI-driven process transparent to your customers? Should you, and will they understand? So it's an interesting one. Start with you, Annabelle, again, and then we'll go around. But what are your thoughts on that?
Whole books have been written on this, so it's an annoying answer of any question. Any question in this topic is it depends, but it slightly does depend. Some degree of transparency is appropriate, I think. For example, the basic question of was AI used is a fair thing to be disclosed. But your questioner is absolutely right that there's quite a lot of answers that just might not make sense to anyone honestly, the way that the algorithms work don't even necessarily make sense to the developers who've developed them. So it is it can be a black box. There is quite a lot of academic work happening here about explainability. Honestly, there are over the last kind of really 12 to 18 months, there's been quite a lot of progress. So it may be that there's more to do in principle there. But I think what you can say is, these were the processes we took on making sure the data was fair. These were the objectives that we gave as we designed. This is what we're trying to achieve with it, and this is the kind of ethical standards we hold ourselves to. And you've got any other questions, you can you can ask us. But I think being at least transparent about its use and making sure that there's a means by which people can challenge if they feel that they're being falling out the wrong side of an algorithm. The example I gave you earlier with the Dutch government, that's partly where they went wrong. The thing about AI is it's absolutely brilliant at averages. What it's not good at is outliers. So if there are circumstances that put a particular instance, at the tails of those distributions, you can being able to have an ability to say, actually, my circumstances are different, and that's why. That might be why. Can your algorithm account for it, or can you have a kind of human override? So that the idea of human in the loop is something that's often talked about, and that's really trying to get to that idea. But if you don't know that AI has been used, then you're not in a position to make that challenge in the first place. So coming back to the point about trying to build trust and take everybody with you on the journey, I think getting some disclosure is necessary, albeit I take the point of your questioner that too much disclosure can actually occlude rather than shine a light on.
Yeah. Alexandra, should you always be transparent to your customer when AI is being used? So I'll put you on the spot again.
Yeah, I mean, my response might be slightly controversial, but we are fixated on the idea that AI should be transparent. Now, the fact that I make something completely transparent to you as a customer, is it actually going to really help you? Because just seeing the code will not mean anything to you, right? And then as humans, on a daily basis, we make so many decisions, we have so many behaviors that are not transparent in the sense that we do not know what the algorithm behind it is, but we never require it. We never want it, right? Even now we speak, okay, that is a physical phenomena. Do we have a download of what is the sort of physical formula behind it? No. Does it mean that we don't trust the fact that we speak? No. So I think that we need to move a bit closer to a certain level of trust of AI and really think about why. And does it matter, rather than let's be transparent about everything.
Yeah, well said. Tom, anything you'd add on this question?
I suppose I'd refer back to my sort of first answer on AI around where's the data from, how are you training it, and what's it for. And I think that process, we shouldn't fear transparency. I put it the other way around. Why would you not be transparent about where the data that your model is trained on is from, how you trained it, and what's it for? And I think a lack of transparency in those, rather than the kind of process or the technical implementation of AI, is desperately needed, because the conclusions that can be garnered from that can vary wildly. And I would want to know, just as a consumer, let alone a CEO of a business, what's going on. You think about health data and models that are trained on outdated data just from men that are used with very basic algorithms to diagnose risk of heart attack for everyone. That is a terrible use of data, badly executed, universally applied, which has big consequences. And that's a real example. And so you see the importance of that process being transparent. Do we need to burden everyone with coding and technical implementation of data? No. But do we need to be transparent about it? Absolutely. And in any other walk of life, you would expect that. If I went to a car manufacturer and said, could you explain to me why this car is safe? And I went, nope, can't possibly tell you any of that. Just it is, believe. Oh, I'm not sure. I'd like a few more details. So I don't think we should fear transparency, but we're probably focused on the wrong bit, the technical bit, rather than the outcomes and the process.
Yeah. A car manufacturer would probably love it if you went to them with that kind of question, though, because
absolutely.
It'll give them the opportunity to sell to you for the next 20 minutes of why you should buy your car. Yeah, interesting. Well, let's just finish off, because we've got one. As I say, we're running out of time. But one question that's come in is, can you give some more example of sort of typical biases that you're seeing in models in the advertising space? So I know we've touched on a few of these before today, but let me just go around the room. Start with you, Alexandra, on any sort of typical biases that you're seeing, trends that organizations, advertisers should be looking out for.
I think I will just parrot what Annabelle said before, in the sense that AI is very good with averages, but not with outliers, and that also means that we hear a lot about hyper personalization and all of that. Is it really hyper personalized? Is it actually not biased and assumes that what A wants is also what B wants? So these would be the classic examples.
So on that, and I'm glad you brought that up, actually, because there's a question in the comments which I'll just come up. Can you define hyper-personalized? Someone has asked.
Well, yes, it is personalized to the next level. So it is personalized for you, it is suitable for you, but actually, given that a lot of our own thinking process happens in the unconscious realm, do we even know, as the sort of end customer, what we really want to have as a personalized offer? No. So I think it's mostly a sort of glitzy marketing term rather than something very useful.
Yeah.
I think building on that, though, I think it is the layering, though, isn't it, of ways of targeting people, combining context, time, motivation, and message, so that you yield a better result. Is the principle, and in some instances it can be very powerful and effective. In others, it can be massively over detailed relative to what the task that you want people or the behavior that you want to influence, and it's merely a function of the technology's ability to do that rather than being particularly useful. But I think it is in essence quite a strong opportunity for all businesses and brands to lay data together and target people.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to add on to that, I mean, of old, you had the option whether you either personalized and kept it small, or you went large and general. And what AI facilitates is the ability to personalize at scale. I mean, and at speed, and with real time kind of feedback loops. I mean, those are, I guess, transformative, or they could be, if we get it right. But I think, again, coming back to tying it back into ethics, there's also a risk there that it can be manipulative, and even if you don't intend it to be manipulative, if your customers feel like they're being manipulated, then you can have a backlash effect too. So with all these things, I think tread respectfully would be my advice.
Yeah. And any other, back to the original question, Anna, about any other sort of, I guess, trends that advertisers should be looking out for, bias trends, when they're building their models that you see regularly?
I think a good one to think about now.
No, you go. No, please go for it, Tom.
I think a good one to look at now is attention. It's a metric that a lot of advertisers are focused on more, and actually there's some powerful and persuasive case that in the value of measuring attention, particularly as we see a proliferation of channels and a movement of people's behavior from sort of more linear viewing to lots of different types of viewing. So attention is becoming an important metric. But an unintended consequence is algorithms focusing on attention but without understanding why. So what you then see is a lot of targeting of people who are potentially slower and older rather than people who are more interested in your brand. And so thinking about and the algorithm's not doing anything wrong there. It's identifying that it's longer to hover over. If you're my age and you're trying to digest information, it takes me a little bit longer than my daughter. And I might not necessarily be more interested in your brand. I'm just a little bit slower on technology. So those sorts of unintended consequences, and then you're furiously hyper-targeting the wrong audience, is something to look out for.
Yeah,
that's
great example. Yeah. Annabelle, we'll give you the last word then on this.
Oh, goodness. Well, I mean, I think that's the comments we've all just made. It's easy to be so impressed by what AI can do that we can forget its limitations, such as that it's averaging, such as that it doesn't actually understand the context of what we're doing. And so why it's super important that we carry on challenging the output that we get from AI, and that we use this tool where possible, because it can be a game changer, but that we do so with our eyes kind of wide open as to how we want to use it, where we need to step in and check, and how we as humans can best use what it gives us to take ourselves to the kind of the next level, to the higher order thinking and better delivery for customers.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, sadly, we've come to an end. I feel like we could probably talk about this stuff all afternoon, but we have to come to an end. So thank you to Annabelle, Alexandra, and Tom. Brilliant session today. Really enjoyed it, and there's so much material, I think, that we've talked about that's really important. Thank you all for joining us. Join me on the next episode of Data and AI Live, which we'll be announcing shortly, which will be in December. And that just leaves me to say thank you and good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.